You will wire your brother that money right now, or I will absolutely destroy your pathetic life." My father roared, slamming his heavy fist against my kitchen counter. I always knew my family viewed me as an invisible disappointment, but I never expected them to demand a $10 million ransom for my own peace. My golden child brother had just laughed at my grandmother, calling her a senile old fool, before tearing up a multi-million-dollar check and tossing it straight into a roaring fireplace. My parents had eagerly followed his cruel lead. They thought they were burning a meaningless piece of paper to assert their absolute dominance. But they had absolutely no idea that the bank manager had just locked his office door, looked me dead in the eye, and whispered a terrifying truth. A truth that suddenly made me the sole owner of my toxic family's entire mountain of secret debt. Thank you for watching video. Before I take you back there, do me one small favor. Take a second to like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. It helps more than you know. My name is Marin, and I am 34 years old. I work as a senior data architect for a medical technology firm in Boston. Growing up in the affluent, manicured suburbs of Wellesley, I learned very quickly that love in our household was a strict, unforgiving transaction. You were either actively building the family empire, or you were a scapegoat meant to absorb their endless frustration. My father, Thatcher, and my mother, Corinne, made those rules brutally clear. My brother, Vance, was the undisputed golden child. He was 37 years old, loud, arrogant, and recklessly masquerading as a luxury real estate developer. Every holiday dinner was an exhausting performance where we all had to sit quietly and worship his fabricated success. Our annual Christmas dinner was no exception. The massive dining room table was set with my mother's finest crystal, reflecting the warm, dancing light of the stone fireplace. Vance sat at the head of the table, swirling an expensive glass of wine, loudly boasting about his latest commercial acquisition in the Seaport District. He used hollow corporate buzzwords, talking down to everyone in the room. My father beamed at him with sheer, unfiltered pride, promising to leverage his own capital to support Vance's visionary empire. When I quietly mentioned that I had just been promoted to a senior executive position at my firm, my mother simply rolled her eyes. She waved her hand dismissively, telling me that playing with computers was not a real career. The insult was sharp, but my exterior remained completely frozen. I had built a fortress around my emotions a long time ago. Sitting silently at the far end of the table was my grandmother, Lenora. She was 82 years old. My parents treated her like a senile burden, a fragile nuisance they only tolerated for the sake of appearances. They thought she was entirely blind to their arrogance. They were monumentally wrong. Lenora possessed the quiet, calculating intensity of a predator studying its prey. Suddenly, she reached into her structured leather handbag. She pulled out 4 thick, sealed envelopes bearing the embossed logo of a highly exclusive private wealth management firm. She handed one to my father, one to my mother, one to Vance, and the last one to me. She stated, in a voice as cold as winter ice, that she wanted to distribute her liquid assets early to see exactly how we handled our inheritances. Vance snorted loudly. He ripped open the premium paper, expecting a minor holiday tip. Inside was a standard bank check, but the numbers printed across the center made my breath catch in my throat. It was a check made out directly to me for exactly $10 million. Vance threw his head back and let out a booming, theatrical laugh. He waved the heavy paper in the air like a cheap novelty prop. "What a senile joke," Vance sneered, his face turning red with his own perceived hilarity. "Do not humor her, Marin. Throw it away." To prove his absolute authority, Vance dramatically tore the $10 million check into pieces. He walked over to the roaring fireplace and tossed the shredded paper directly into the flames. We all watched the paper curl, blacken, and turn to gray ash. My father, not wanting to be outdone by his own son, laughed sharply. He ripped his envelope in half without even looking at it and threw it into the fire. My mother pushed her envelope away with utter disgust, abandoning it next to her wine glass for the cleaning staff to throw away. I did not speak. I did not react. I simply folded my crisp check, unzipped my leather purse, and tucked it safely inside. I did it out of basic human respect for my grandmother. I watched my family gloat, completely unaware of the trap that had just snapped shut around them. The next morning, the harsh Boston wind whipped against my coat as I walked into my local bank branch. I just wanted to verify the check was a novelty item so I could peacefully throw it away and close the book on my family's holiday madness. I handed the folded paper to the teller. She ran it through the scanner. Instantly, her computer terminal flashed a solid, blinding red. She gasped, grabbing the paper, and practically ran toward the back offices. A moment later, the branch manager, Mr. Sterling, emerged. His face had completely drained of color, leaving behind a sickly, pale mask of utter shock. He rushed me into his glass-walled office and immediately locked the heavy wooden door behind us. "Ma'am, this check is drawn from an account so exclusive my tellers do not even have clearance to view it," Mr. Sterling whispered, his voice trembling as he looked at a secure tablet. "I just got off the phone with the Central Wealth Division in New York. The funds are entirely real. Your grandmother has $10 million sitting in a verified account, and it has just cleared directly into your name." The air vanished from the room. An icy chill washed over my entire body. My grandmother was secretly sitting on an empire of staggering wealth. And my father and my brother had just happily incinerated $20 million simply to prove a cruel point. They had burned their own salvation to ashes. But they had absolutely no idea they had just incinerated their only lifeline. 3 days later, my father called to inform me that Lenora had passed away peacefully in her sleep. A profound wave of genuine grief hit me, mourning the only person in the family who possessed an ounce of integrity. When I arrived at the Wellesley estate for the funeral reception, the house was buzzing with frantic, superficial energy. My mother had transformed the memorial into a high-society networking event, desperately trying to secure her status among the local elite. I walked away from the sickening display and past my father's private study. The door was slightly ajar. I froze in the hallway, completely hidden in the shadows. Vance was pacing the floor, his voice pitching high with absolute panic. "If I do not get $8 million by Friday, the creditors will gut my company," Vance choked out, his breathing ragged. "Thank God the old woman finally died. We can use her estate to bail me out." My father calmly poured a glass of scotch. He promised Vance that he would use Lenora's modest house and retirement funds as collateral to stall the creditors. They were completely convinced that a standard, predictable inheritance was waiting to save them from total ruin. They were banking on a fortune they had already turned to ash. The day after the funeral, we all gathered in the towering downtown office of Mr. Caldwell, Lenora's fierce, unyielding estate attorney. Vance paced the mahogany boardroom, aggressively tapping his phone, ready to receive his bailout. My father sat at the head of the table, demanding that Caldwell skip the formalities and transfer the liquid assets immediately. Mr. Caldwell did not flinch. He adjusted his glasses and read a single, remarkably brief document. He announced that Lenora had distributed the absolute entirety of her liquid fortune on Christmas Day. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The arrogant masks completely slipped from their faces. "The fact that you chose to incinerate your inheritance is, as the will states, entirely your own burden to bear," Caldwell stated, his voice completely devoid of pity. Vance stumbled backward, hitting the glass wall. His face contorted in pure, unadulterated terror as his brain finally connected the horrifying dots. They had burned $30 million. The money was gone. Caldwell explained that any uncashed funds had already been automatically swept into a blind, irrevocable charitable trust. My father shot up from his chair, his hands shaking violently. My mother began to weep uncontrollably. And then, slowly, their desperate, bloodshot eyes turned down the length of the long table. They looked directly at me. I was the only person who had walked out of that house with an intact piece of paper. That evening, the frantic pounding on my apartment door started. My fiancé, Alden, stood quietly beside me as my father and mother shoved their way into our home. My father slammed a leather folder onto my kitchen counter, his face purple with rage. He demanded that I immediately wire $8 million to Vance's holding company. My mother deployed her sickening, artificial sweetness, telling me that I did not need the money because my career was just a cute little hobby. I looked at the people who had emotionally starved me for 3 decades. I felt a surge of absolute, unyielding power. "You burned your salvation in the fireplace," I stated, my voice dangerously low and completely steady. "I am not cleaning up your ashes." "The answer is no." My father exploded, screaming that he would absolutely destroy my life. Alden stepped forward, a silent, immovable wall of protection, and forced them out of our home. The retaliation was swift and entirely ruthless. By 8 o'clock the next morning, a process server handed me a manila envelope on the sidewalk. Vance had filed an emergency injunction against me for elder financial abuse. My father had paid off a corrupt country club doctor to sign a fabricated medical affidavit claiming Lenora had advanced dementia. Within hours, I received a notification that every single bank account attached to my name had been completely frozen by a court order. They were trying to starve me out. They wanted me to feel the exact same suffocating panic that Vance was experiencing. Furthermore, my mother launched a vicious smear campaign, turning our entire extended family against me with a barrage of hateful, threatening text messages. I felt the walls closing in, but Alden held my hands, reminding me that they were only attacking because they had zero legal leverage. I was not going to break. I was going to strike back. I used a private service elevator to sneak into Mr. Caldwell's office the following morning. I expected a grueling legal battle. Instead, Mr. Caldwell smiled, a sharp, knowing expression that sent a chill down my spine. He opened a heavy, leather-bound dossier. "You did not just inherit cash, Marin," Caldwell said, sliding the federal documents across the marble table. "You inherited the exact leash wrapped around your brother's neck." The legal vocabulary suddenly flooded the room, heavy and absolute. Lenora was not just a wealthy widow. She was the sole owner of a shadow holding company called Pinnacle Horizon Trust. When traditional banks stopped lending to Vance due to his catastrophic risk profile, he had sought massive private equity bridge loans. He thought he was borrowing from a faceless syndicate. He was actually borrowing from his own grandmother. Lenora was his primary creditor. "Because you did not burn your check, you triggered the succession clause," Caldwell explained, handing me a silver pen. "You are now the majority shareholder and sole proxy of the subsidiary. You own all of his debt. You possess the legal authority to initiate immediate foreclosure." But the trap went even deeper. Caldwell revealed a property deed. In order to keep Vance's fraudulent shell companies afloat, my father had committed federal embezzlement. He had forged my mother's signature to take out 3 massive, illegal secondary mortgages on their Wellesley estate. My brother was a fraud. My father was a felon. And I was now holding the absolute authority to execute their downfall. I signed the corporate proxy documents without a single ounce of hesitation. Despite being totally insolvent, Vance was completely delusional. The following night, he hosted a massive, high-profile investor gala at the Grand Plaza Hotel. He had flown in a syndicate of wealthy foreign investors. He planned to stand on stage, commit federal wire fraud, and promise them that his business was backed by $40 million in inherited family assets that were simply tied up in a frivolous lawsuit caused by his mentally unstable sister. I walked into the brilliant, chandelier-lit ballroom wearing a sharp, emerald green silk gown. Alden and Mr. Caldwell flanked me, forming an impenetrable wall of legal and personal protection. The crowd parted as I walked straight down the center aisle. My mother gasped, clutching her rented diamonds. My father froze, his face draining of all color. Vance was standing on the elevated stage, holding a microphone, actively lying to the lead foreign investor. When he saw me, his arrogant mask completely shattered. He screamed into the microphone, calling me a sociopath, begging security to remove me. I ignored his pathetic display. I stepped onto the stage and handed the lead investor a crisp, high-gloss dossier containing the forensic audit of Vance's entire Ponzi scheme, alongside the forged mortgage documents my father had signed. I am the majority shareholder of Pinnacle Horizon Trust, and I am the primary creditor holding the absolute entirety of this man's debt, I announced, my voice carrying clearly across the silent, stunned ballroom. He does not have an inheritance. He burned it in a fireplace because his ego was too massive to accept a gift from an elderly woman. I turned to look directly at my brother, whose chest was heaving in pure, unadulterated terror. I did not ruin you, Vance, I stated, the icy words echoing off the vaulted ceiling. You threw your salvation into the fire. I just let it burn. The lead investor slammed the dossier shut, his eyes burning with absolute fury. He announced that he was contacting federal authorities immediately. The syndicate turned and marched out of the room. Vance collapsed to his knees on the stage, weeping like a broken child. My father simply stared at the floor, realizing he was going to prison. My mother wailed hysterically, mourning the total evaporation of her precious social status. I did not look back at them. I took Alden's hand and walked out into the cool Boston night, completely free. Exactly 1 year later, I am sitting in my beautiful, sunlit office. The injunction against me was instantly dismissed with prejudice, and the corrupt doctor lost his medical license. The FBI launched a massive criminal investigation into Vance's firm. He is currently sitting in a federal penitentiary awaiting trial for systemic wire fraud, facing decades behind bars. When the bank discovered my father's forged signatures, they immediately executed a foreclosure. My parents were forcibly evicted from their Wellesley mansion. They now live in a cramped, 2-bedroom apartment in a bleak industrial suburb, completely ostracized by the wealthy society they once ruled. My father is under federal investigation, and my mother spends her days trapped with the man who secretly gambled away her entire life. I used the $10 million to found Lenora Labs, a technology incubator that provides seed capital and resources for female software architects. I am happily married to Alden. We built a beautiful home surrounded by massive oak trees, far away from the toxic noise of my past. I have obtained an absolute, unyielding peace that none of their fabricated wealth could ever buy. They taught me that sharing DNA does not entitle anyone to your sanity or your success. Share your experiences in the comments below about a time you had to walk away from toxic family members to protect your peace. If my journey to independence resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about reclaiming your power. Are you ready to stop cleaning up their ashes and start building your own empire?